The sun spills over the horizon like molten gold, painting the rock formations of Monument Valley with long, sharp shadows. The only sound that cuts through the arid silence is the rhythmic clatter of weary hooves against the parched clay soil. A lone rider, his poncho bearing the dust of 3 states, holds the reins loosely as his chestnut horse strides forward with his head down, sniffing the distant promise of water. The landscape changes slowly. The ochre vastness gives way to a narrow gorge, where the stone walls retain the day's heat, like a clay oven. At the top of a ridge, the metallic glint of newly laid railroad tracks cuts through the wild land, a scar of progress that bleeds black smoke into the purple sky. The man stops at the summit. He removes his wide-brimmed hat, revealing a sun-marked brow and eyes that seem to have seen entire cities rise and be reduced to ashes. Down below, a miner's camp pulsates with a feverish energy. Kerosene lanterns begin at the twilight, like fallen stars in the mud. The wind blows, carrying the smell of strong coffee, chewed tobacco, and the metallic odor of pickaxes striking quartz. The rider seeks neither gold nor redemption. His calloused, steady fingers slide only once across the worn leather holster at his waist, checking the familiar weight of the wooden stock. He descends a slope as the silver moon takes command of the sky. With each step, the tension increases. The sound of crickets ceases abruptly as he enters the perimeter of the lights. He crosses the main street, where the sound of discordant piano leaks from a saloon with swinging doors. A curtain moves in an upper window. A stray dog crosses his path and disappears into the darkness of an alley. The knight dismounts before an unfinished wooden structure, the skeleton of a church or a courthouse, where a single man awaits him, seated on a crate, cleaning a rifle by the flickering torchlight. The two face each other. Time seems to expand, stretching like a violin string about to snap. The knight pulls out a pocket watch, observes the second hand for an instant, and snaps it shut with a dry click that echoes throughout the silent village. The silence that follows the clock's click is absolute, a vacuum of sound that seems to suck the oxygen from the night air. The man seated on the crate does not rise immediately. The rifle barrel gleams in the torchlight as he rests on his knees, a steel barrier between 2 destinies. The knight, motionless as a bronze statue, keeps his right hand hovering inches from the butt of his revolver, his fingers curved like a falcon's claws. The tension breaks not with a gunshot, but with the slow movement of the silver coin slipping from the fingers of the seated man, falling to the hard-packed earth with a dull thud. It's the signal. In a blur of movement, the rifle is raised, but the rider is a fraction of a second faster. The flash of the shot illuminates the street for an instant, turning night into day. The sound is a dry thunder that ricochets off the wooden walls, followed by the clinking of the brass casing hitting the ground. The rifle falls useless, while the man in the crate recoils, clutching his shoulder, hatred burning in his eyes more than pain. The rider doesn't fire again. He walks calmly, the sound of his spurs marking a mournful rhythm on the wooden floor of the porch. He bends down, picks the silver coin from the dust, and puts it in his waistcoat pocket. Without looking back, he walks to his horse, but before mounting, his eyes find movement in the shadows of the side alley. There, amidst barrels of rainwater and bales of hay, a pair of childlike eyes gleam in the darkness. A boy, no more than 10 years old, holds a crumpled harmonica against his chest, watching the unfolding violence with a mixture of terror and fascination. The rider hesitates. He removes a time-stained blue silk scarf from his neck and lets it fall onto a horse-tying post before mounting his saddle. The chestnut horse gallops out of camp, leaving behind the sound of the piano which, strangely, returns to play in the saloon, as if death and dueling were merely part of furniture. The road is now a silver path under the full moonlight. The low vegetation gives way to a field of wildflowers that ripple like a dark sea in the morning wind. The smell of gunpowder is slowly replaced by the scent of damp sage. The rider rides towards the distant mountains, where the snow-capped peaks gleam like the teeth of a giant. He knows that news of the shooting will travel faster than his horse. In the distance, the howl of a coyote greets his arrival in the wilderness, where the laws of men are nothing more than whispers lost in the wind. The boy emerges from the shadows with the hesitation of a wounded animal, his bare feet feeling the cold earth that still retains the echo of the gunshots. He approaches the horse-tying post, where the blue silk scarf flutters gently like a flag of surrender. His small, soot-stained hands touch the thin fabric, a stark contrast to the roughness of the barbed wood, and the smell of gunpowder that still lingers in the air. As he ties the scarf around his neck, the boy seems to inherit a weight that doesn't belong to him, a silent promise of destiny he doesn't yet understand. Meanwhile, the rider is now just a dark spot in the silvery vastness. The path to the mountains becomes steep, and the air begins to cool, carrying the scent of pine trees and ancient snow. The chestnut horse snorts, the vapor from its nostrils creating small clouds that dissipate instantly. They reach a plateau where the ruins of an old Spanish mission rise like the ribs of a forgotten giant. The adobe walls, peeled by time, hold the silence of centuries. The man dismounts. He doesn't light a fire. The light would be a beacon for those who will surely come. Instead, he sits against a stone wall that still retains a trace of the sun's heat. He takes a piece of dried meat and a small harmonica from his saddlebag, identical to the one the boy held in the village. He brings the instrument to his lips, but doesn't blow. He simply closes his eyes, letting the music he doesn't dare play resonate in his memory. Suddenly, the horse's ears perk up. A metallic sound, almost imperceptible, cuts through the breeze, the scraping of a stirrup against a rock, miles away below. The rider opens his eyes. He shows no fear, only a profound exhaustion that seems to come from within his bones. He stands, adjusts the saddle, and begins to prepare a visual trap. He leaves his hat hanging on a dry sage branch, positioning it so that the moonlight creates a convincing silhouette against the mission wall. He retreats into the darkness of the inner ruins, merging with the shadows of the crumbling arches. From atop the bell-less belfry, he watches the torchlights begin to snake along the mountain trail. There are 5, moving with the precision of wolves that have smelled blood. The man draws his rifle from its saddle holster, the sound of the bolt being pulled the only warning the night receives. The hunt has shifted direction, and the hunter has now become the terrain. The torches draw closer, snaking up the slope like fiery serpents devouring the darkness. The rider, perched atop the ruined belfry, watches the flickering glow reflected in the lenses of his weary eyes. He doesn't breathe quickly. His chest rises and falls in a slow cadence, almost in sync with the wind howling through cracks in the adobe. The first pursuer reaches the mission courtyard. He halts his horse, pointing to the silhouette of the hat hanging from the sage branch. The other 4 spread out in a perfect semicircle, rifles at the ready, the shadows cast by their torches dancing frantically against the peeling walls. The leader makes a brusque hand signal. The silence of the mountain is suddenly shattered by a hail of bullets that pierce the hat and the dry branch, splinters of wood flying like sparks. It is in this precise moment of distraction that the rider acts. The barrel of his rifle emerges from between the mud bricks of the bell tower. A single, dry shot knocks the torch from the leader's hand, plunging the center of the courtyard into a confused twilight where the fire now consumes the dry grass on the ground. Panic sets in among the animals. The horses neigh and rear, blinded by the glare and the smell of smoke. The rider does not seek easy targets. He shoots at the harnesses, at the lanterns hanging from the saddles, transforming the counterattack into a chaos of light and shadow. One of the pursuers manages to outflank the church, leaping from his horse and charging toward the rotting wooden staircase leading to the top. The sound of heavy boots crushing the steps echoes like the pounding of a racing heart. The rider drops his rifle and draws his revolver, but doesn't point at the door. He points it at the weakened ceiling above the entrance. The impact of the bullet causes an oak beam, corroded by decades of termites and neglect, to collapse with a final, judgmental crash, blocking access and burying the pursuer in a cloud of dust and rubble. Down below, the survivors retreat, dragging their wounded away from the circle of light of the fire that now consumes part of the mission. The rider watches them disappear down the mountain, the lights of their torches now flickering and hurried. He descends a hemp rope at the back of the structure, avoiding the destroyed staircase. Upon reaching the ground, he walks to his fallen hat, now riddled with holes. He wipes it on his trousers, places it back on his head with a quick gesture, and mounts his chestnut horse. The fire behind him illuminates the path as he rides to the opposite side of the ridge, towards the white salt desert, and it shines under the moon like a ghostly ocean. The rider reaches the edge of the salt desert, where the solid ground dies and gives way to an endless, icy white crust under the moonlight. He stops his horse for a long minute. The heat of the fire at the mission is now just a distant, orange glow on his back, a pale reminder of the violence that haunts him. He takes out his pocket watch once more. The hand has stopped. With a slow movement, he releases it into the white immensity. The metal strikes the salt silently, disappearing into the whiteness like a buried secret. There is no more time to count, no more debts to collect. The man adjusts his perforated hat, hides his face under the brim, and spurs his chestnut horse. The horse advances, and the sound of hooves becomes a muffled, rhythmic clatter, until the silhouette of both begins to merge with the pale horizon. The white dust kicked up by the gallop lingers in the air like ghostly smoke, before settling once more into absolute silence. Behind him, the wind blows over the ruins of the mission, extinguishing the last embers. The desert, vast and indifferent, reclaims its territory. The rider is no longer a man, but a trace that the dawn sun will, in a few hours, completely erase.